Both of you have lived in China for nearly 10 years and have gone on many research trips. Where was China then? And what's the most significant change?
I think a lot of things have changed in China over the 10 years that I've been here, and many for the better. So, for example, I'm a bird watcher. I like to go watching birds. And when I first started bird watching in Beijing, it would be very common for me to find people trapping birds for the cage bird trade predominantly. And the law enforcement authorities at that time were not interested. You would call them, and it was almost as if you're calling me about birds. I have so many more important things to do, and that was the general attitude. But now it's very different. So in my area of Beijing, in Shunyi, I still occasionally find people trapping birds. It's still a problem, but the reaction of the law enforcement is much different. So now I have the local police on my WeChat, and if I find someone trapping birds, I can immediately send them the location and the picture, and they will respond very quickly. Normally within an hour, they will be there. And that is a huge change from 10 years ago. And of course, at a bigger level in China, I think we've seen some major positive changes. So we have the concept of eco-civilization, right from the top, from the president. And then underneath that, there's been many positive initiatives to help underpin that. So we've seen strengthening of environmental laws. We've seen the creation of national parks. We've seen the ecological red line system. We've seen a complete turnaround in the Yellow Sea in terms of coastal wetland conservation. There are many environmental NGOs springing up all over China, set up by young people to protect particular species or ecosystems. And so there's been a sort of environmental awakening, I describe it as, over the last few years. And I think that is really positive for the future. Also, we can talk about air pollution. When I first came 10 years ago, it was a really serious problem in Beijing. It's still a problem, but it's much better. There's been a lot of emphasis on improving air quality and also water quality. The rivers in Beijing now are much cleaner. One issue that's still outstanding is soil pollution, which is also a serious issue in some places. So there's still work to be done, but there's been a lot of progress, I think, over the last 10 years.
So, like Terry, I've been here to witness eco-civilization from when it first became a national priority, which I think was about 2012. It's being put into the constitution and actually being implemented. It's not just something theoretical, but we have ecological red lines in my province. There is a much greater awareness and cognizance of biodiversity. There is also much more domestic tourism to see biodiversity. So every year we have more people with more expensive cameras coming to take photographs of biodiversity. You barely saw that when I first came to China. We're also seeing a depopularization of wild meat. So when I first came to China, it was very easy to see wild meat for sale. You don't really see that anymore because it's realized that that isn't something that's really acceptable anymore, particularly in young people. I think what we still do need to see is more emphasis on other elements that the West is now doing well now, like around developments, for example. So when we build a new house, etc., when we're developing a house, at the moment there still aren't strong policies here in terms of doing a bat assessment or a bird assessment when you're doing that, and that is now mandated in the West.
Yeah, I think just a small example of the greater awareness on biodiversity. I think just this week, the day before I came here, I had a meeting with the Beijing government about renovations that are going to be planned on a lot of the old buildings in Beijing. And these old buildings are very important nesting sites for swifts. And so they called a meeting to discuss how to manage those renovations in a way that would not negatively affect the swifts. So the swifts are nesting there for 3 months of the year. So of course the ideal situation would be to do the renovations outside that time, or if you have to do them during that time, to consider ways to enable the swifts still to access their nests. And I think this is a conversation that, you know, would not have happened 5 or 10 years ago. So I think, you know, it's just a small example, but it shows that there's a general greater awareness and consideration for biodiversity.
So from those small examples to the bigger policies, where do you see China heading?
China's heading in a very good direction compared to when both of us came here. Some of these policies are unrecognizable. And I mean, the ecological red line policy is global leading policy. There are not many countries that have actually said, well, we're going to have this mode of managing land so that we can more equitably share land between biodiversity and humans. And they've done it nationwide. That's really impressive. China is really doing well domestically now in terms of domestic policy, but China's becoming a global leader. And part of being a global leader is being a steward elsewhere. China is also a major investor and a developer outside China. So implementing those domestic policies on international development and expenditure is a next step to being a global leader, to showing, yeah, we have this policy, it's working well domestically, and if it can do that, then it will have a real global positive power in terms of biodiversity conservation and sustainable management.